The old woman's trembling hands signed away her home of 50 years. Across town, her grandson lay in a hospital bed, his life hanging by a thread that only a miracle, or a fortune, could mend. Eleanor Thompson stared at the pen in her hand, watching as a drop of ink slowly formed at its tip. It reminded her of the tears she'd been holding back all morning. The realtor, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, gently touched Eleanor's shoulder. "Mrs. Thompson, are you sure about this? It's a big decision." Eleanor looked up, her gaze steely despite the moisture in her eyes. "When it comes to saving Thomas, there's no decision to make." The living room around her seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as if protesting the sale. Every corner held a memory. The scuff on the doorframe where she'd marked Thomas's height each birthday, the worn spot on the carpet where her late husband's favorite chair had stood for decades. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was the little boy fighting for his life in Mercy General's pediatric ward. As Eleanor signed the final document, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, only to be replaced by a new one. The house was no longer hers, but Thomas now had a fighting chance. She stood, her joints creaking in protest, and made her way to the window. The old maple tree in the front yard swayed in the breeze, its leaves a riot of autumn colors. How many times had Thomas climbed that tree, laughing as he swung from its branches? "I'll give you a moment," the realtor said softly, stepping out onto the porch. Eleanor's fingers traced the familiar patterns in the curtains she'd sewn herself 20 years ago. The fabric was faded now, but the memories were as vivid as ever. She closed her eyes, remembering the day Thomas was born. She'd held him right here by this window, marveling at his tiny fingers and the tuft of dark hair that stood up like a little mohawk. A car horn honked outside, startling Eleanor from her reverie. She turned to see her daughter, Lisa, pulling into the driveway. Lisa's face was a mask of worry and guilt as she hurried up the front walk. "Mom," Lisa said, bursting through the door, "you don't have to do this. We'll find another way." Eleanor shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "Sweetheart, there is no other way. The treatment Thomas needs, it's our only hope." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "But this house, it's been in our family for generations. Dad built so much of it with his own hands. And your father would be the first to say that a house is just wood and nails," Eleanor replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Family is what matters. Thomas is what matters." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Robert, her neighbor who was sitting with Thomas at the hospital. "No change," it read. "He's stable." Eleanor showed the message to Lisa, whose shoulders slumped with a mixture of relief and ongoing worry. "See," Eleanor said, "he's fighting. And we need to fight for him." The realtor poked her head back in. "Mrs. Thompson, the buyers are here to do the final walkthrough. Should I ask them to come back later?" Eleanor squared her shoulders. "No, it's all right. Let them in." As the young couple entered, their eyes wide with excitement about their new home, Eleanor felt a pang of nostalgia. She remembered how she and her late husband, George, had looked when they first stepped into this house. They'd been so full of dreams, of plans for the future. "Oh, honey, look at the built-in bookshelves," the woman exclaimed, running her hand along the polished wood. "George made those," Eleanor said softly. "He loved working with his hands." The couple exchanged a glance, suddenly aware of the emotional weight of the moment. "We'll take good care of them," the man assured her. Eleanor nodded, grateful for their sensitivity. As she showed them around, pointing out the quirks and charms of the old house, she found herself sharing stories. The time Thomas had drawn on the wallpaper in the hallway with permanent marker. The Christmas when George had dressed up as Santa and gotten stuck in the chimney. With each tale, the house seemed to come alive, as if saying goodbye in its own way. When they reached the kitchen, Eleanor paused. This had always been the heart of the home, where countless family dinners had been shared, where Thomas had taken his first steps. She ran her hand along the worn countertop, remembering how she'd taught Thomas to bake cookies right here. "Mrs. Thompson," the realtor said gently, "we're all done here. Is there anything else you need before we finalize everything?" Eleanor looked around one last time, her gaze lingering on the height chart penciled onto the kitchen doorframe. Thomas's last mark, from just a month ago, seemed to mock her with its promise of growth and future. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's time." As she stepped out onto the porch, keys in hand to give to the new owners, Eleanor felt a sudden wave of doubt. Was she doing the right thing? What if the treatment didn't work? What if? But then her phone buzzed again. Another text from Robert. Thomas asked for you. He says he loves you to the moon and back. Eleanor's heart swelled. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. A house was just a structure, but the love between her and Thomas, the bonds of family, those were unbreakable. With a deep breath, she turned to face the young couple who would now call this place home. Take care of it, she said, pressing the keys into the woman's hand. Make happy memories here. As Eleanor walked down the front path for the last time, she didn't look back. Her eyes were fixed firmly on the road ahead, on the hospital where Thomas waited, on the future they would fight for together. The realtor called after her, Mrs. Thompson, do you need a ride to the hospital? Eleanor shook her head, a newfound energy in her step. No, thank you. I think I'll walk. It's a beautiful day, and I have a lot to think about. As she set off down the familiar streets of Lakeside, Eleanor felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. Sadness at leaving behind the home she'd loved for so long, fear for Thomas's future, but also a fierce determination. She'd always taught her students that love required sacrifice, and now she was living that lesson in the most profound way. The lake came into view, its surface shimmering in the autumn sunlight. Eleanor paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of her hometown. She remembered bringing Thomas here for picnics, teaching him to skip stones across the water's surface. The memory brought a smile to her face, and she silently vowed that they would make new memories here, once Thomas was well again. As she approached the hospital, Eleanor straightened her back and lifted her chin. She may have given up her house, but she hadn't given up hope. And as long as there was hope, there was a future worth fighting for. Eleanor pushed through the revolving doors of Mercy General, the antiseptic smell hitting her like a wall. She'd grown accustomed to it over the past few weeks, but today it seemed sharper, more intrusive. Perhaps it was the weight of what she'd just done, or the anticipation of seeing Thomas. The elevator ride to the pediatric ward felt interminable. Eleanor found herself studying her reflection in the polished metal doors. The woman staring back at her looked older than she remembered, worry lines etched deeply around her eyes and mouth. But there was a fire in those eyes, a determination that hadn't been there before. As the doors slid open, she was greeted by the familiar cacophony of beeping machines and hushed conversations. Robert Garcia, her neighbor and friend of 30 years, was pacing outside Thomas's room. When he saw Eleanor, relief washed over his face. "Elle," he said, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "Thank God you're here. The doctor just went in to check on him." Eleanor felt her heart rate quicken. "Any changes?" Robert shook his head. "Not that I know of. But Thomas has been asking for you. He's a tough kid, Elle." Just like his grandmother, she managed a small smile at that. Robert had been her rock through all of this, stepping in to help without being asked. In the weeks since Thomas's diagnosis, he'd become a fixture at the hospital, bringing coffee and sandwiches, sitting with Thomas so Eleanor could grab a few hours of sleep. "Robert, she began, but he cut her off with a gentle squeeze of her hand. "You don't have to say anything. I know." The door to Thomas's room opened, and Dr. Sarah Chen stepped out. The young doctor's face was a mask of professional composure, but Eleanor had learned to read the subtle signs of concern in her eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, drive," Chen said. "I'm glad you're here. Can we talk for a moment?" Eleanor nodded, following the doctor to a small consultation room. As they sat down, she braced herself for bad news. "Thomas's condition is stable, drive," Chen began, "but we're not seeing the improvement we hoped for with the current treatment. I've been in touch with my colleagues at the Mayo Clinic about the experimental therapy we discussed." Eleanor leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "And they're willing to take Thomas as a patient? But, doctor..." Chen hesitated, her professional demeanor slipping for a moment to reveal genuine empathy. "The treatment is expensive, Mrs. Thompson. Very expensive. And it's not covered by insurance." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I sold the house this morning. Will it be enough, doctor?" Chen's eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and admiration crossing her face. It should cover a significant portion, yes. But Mrs. Thompson, are you sure? That's an enormous sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice, Eleanor said firmly. It's what grandmothers do. There was a moment of silence as Dr. Chen seemed to reassess the woman sitting before her. Well, she said finally, in that case, we should start making arrangements for the transfer. The sooner we can get Thomas started on this treatment, the better his chances. As they discussed the logistics, Eleanor felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The decision had been made, the die cast. Now, all that mattered was moving forward. When they finished, Eleanor made her way back to Thomas's room. She paused at the door, taking a moment to compose herself before entering. The sight of her grandson, small and pale against the white hospital sheets, never failed to catch her breath. Grandma. Thomas's face lit up as she entered, and for a moment, he looked like the vibrant, healthy boy he'd been just months ago. Hello, my brave boy, Eleanor said, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking his hand. It felt so small, so fragile in hers. How are you feeling today? Thomas shrugged, a gesture so normal it made Eleanor's heart ache. Okay, I guess. The nurses let me have Jell-O for breakfast. Eleanor forced a smile. Well, that sounds like a treat. Grandma, Thomas said, his voice suddenly serious. Are you okay? You look sad. Leave it to Thomas to see right through her. Eleanor had always marveled at his perceptiveness, his ability to read people's emotions. It was one of the many things that made him special. I'm not sad, sweetheart, she said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. I'm just thinking about all the adventures we're going to have when you're better. Thomas's eyes lit up. Can we go camping by the lake again? Like we did last summer? Of course we can, Eleanor promised, her voice thick with emotion. We'll do all your favorite things. But first, we're going on a little trip. She explained about the new treatment, careful to keep her tone upbeat and optimistic. Thomas listened intently, asking questions that belied his young age. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Will it hurt? He asked finally, his voice small. Eleanor's heart clenched. I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know that you're the bravest person I've ever met. And I'll be with you every step of the way. Thomas nodded, seeming to draw strength from her words. Okay, he said, I'm ready. As Eleanor sat with Thomas, reading him stories and playing quiet games, she found her mind wandering to the logistics ahead. There would be so much to arrange, the travel, the temporary housing near the Mayo Clinic, not to mention the mountain of paperwork that came with experimental treatments. But as she looked at Thomas, his face alight with laughter at a silly joke in the book they were reading, she knew that no challenge was too great. She would move mountains for this boy, sell 100 houses if that's what it took. The day wore on, a parade of nurses and doctors coming and going. Lisa arrived in the afternoon, her eyes red-rimmed from crying but her demeanor strong for Thomas's sake. Eleanor pulled her daughter aside, explaining the plan for the new treatment. Mom, Lisa said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do more to help. Eleanor cupped her daughter's face in her hands. You're here. You're being strong for Thomas. That's all the help I need. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the hospital room, Eleanor found herself alone with Thomas once more. He had drifted off to sleep, his face peaceful for the first time in days. She sat in the chair by his bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. In the quiet of the room, with only the soft beeping of machines for company, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Tears she had held back all day began to fall silently. But they weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of determination, of a love so fierce it threatened to consume her. As she wiped them away, Eleanor made a silent vow to the sleeping boy before her. We're going to beat this, Thomas, she whispered. Together, and when we do, we'll build a new home. Not of wood and brick, but of memories and love. I promise you that. As if in response, Thomas stirred slightly in his sleep, a small smile playing on his lips. And in that moment, Eleanor knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. United, unbreakable, and filled with hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor threw herself into preparations for their journey to the Mayo Clinic with a single-minded focus that left little room for doubt or fear. She coordinated with Dr. Chen, filled out endless forms, and arranged for their stay in Rochester, Minnesota. Through it all, she maintained a veneer of calm optimism, determined to be the rock that Thomas and Lisa needed. The morning of their departure dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that usually filled Eleanor with joy. Today, however, she felt a complex mix of emotions as she stood on the sidewalk outside her former home, waiting for the medical transport that would take them to the airport. "You okay, Elle?" Robert's voice startled her from her thoughts. He had insisted on driving them to meet the transport, his car loaded with the few suitcases they were taking. Eleanor turned to him, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about the last time we left for a big trip. Remember? When George was still alive, and we all went to Yellowstone." Robert's eyes softened with the shared memory. How could I forget? Thomas was, what, 5? He was convinced he was going to see a real live dinosaur. The memory brought a genuine smile to Eleanor's face. He made a stop at every rock formation, insisting it was a fossilized T-Rex. Their laughter was interrupted by the arrival of the medical transport. Reality crashed back as Eleanor watched the paramedics carefully load Thomas, who looked impossibly small on the stretcher, into the vehicle. Lisa climbed in after him, her face a mask of worried determination. As Eleanor moved to follow, Robert caught her arm. "Elle," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Whatever happens, you're not alone in this. You know that, right?" Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and pulled Robert into a tight hug. As she released him and climbed into the transport, she allowed herself one last look at the house that had been her home for so long. The new owners had already started moving in, a child's bicycle leaning against the porch railing. Life goes on, she thought, turning her gaze resolutely forward. The journey to Rochester was mercifully uneventful. Thomas slept for most of the flight, the medication keeping him comfortable. Eleanor used the time to study the information packet's drive. Shen had given her about the experimental treatment, determined to understand every aspect of what lay ahead. As they landed in Minnesota, Eleanor was struck by how different everything looked. The landscape, the architecture, even the quality of the light seemed alien. It hit her then, with startling clarity, how far they'd come from their comfortable life in Lakeside. But as she looked at Thomas, his face lighting up at the sight of the plane's wings from his window seat, she knew they were exactly where they needed to be. The next few days were a blur of consultations, tests, and more paperwork. Dr. Evelyn Reeves, the lead researcher on the experimental treatment, met with them on their second day at the clinic. She was a tall, imposing woman with a no-nonsense demeanor that Eleanor found oddly comforting. "I want to be very clear, Drive," Reeves said, her piercing gaze moving between Eleanor and Lisa. "This treatment is not a guaranteed cure. It's shown promising results in early trials, but every case is unique. There will be difficult days ahead." Eleanor nodded, her hand finding Thomas's under the table. "We understand, Doctor. We're prepared for whatever comes, Doctor." Reeves's expression softened slightly. "Good. Because I need Thomas to be as committed to this as we are." She turned to the boy, her tone gentler but still direct. "This won't be easy, Thomas. There will be days when you feel awful, when you might want to give up. But I need you to promise me that you'll keep fighting, no matter what. Can you do that?" Thomas sat up straighter in his wheelchair, his chin lifting in a gesture so reminiscent of his grandmother that Lisa had to stifle a smile. "I promise, Drive, Reeves. I'm going to beat this." As they left the consultation room, Eleanor felt a mix of hope and trepidation. The road ahead would be hard, but they had come too far to turn back now. The treatment began the following week. Eleanor had thought she was prepared for the toll it would take on Thomas, but the reality was far harsher than she had imagined. There were days when he was too weak to lift his head, his small body ravaged by the powerful drugs designed to save him. On those days, Eleanor would sit by his bed for hours, reading his favorite stories or simply holding his hand, willing her strength into him. One particularly difficult evening, after a day of intense treatments that had left Thomas pale and shaking, Eleanor found herself alone in the small kitchenette of their temporary apartment. Lisa had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was sleeping in the room she shared with Thomas. Eleanor stood at the sink, mechanically washing the few dishes they had used, when a wave of emotion hit her so hard she had to grip the counter to stay upright. For the first time since this ordeal began, she allowed herself to truly feel the weight of it all. The loss of her home, the fear for Thomas's life, the uncertain future that stretched before them. Silent sobs racked her body as she slid to the floor, her back against the cabinet doors. "Grandma?" Thomas's voice, weak but concerned, came from the doorway. Eleanor looked up to see him standing there, leaning heavily on his IV stand. "Thomas," she exclaimed, quickly wiping her eyes. "Sweetheart, you should be in bed. You need your rest." But Thomas, with a determination that belied his frail appearance, made his way over to her. He lowered himself to the floor with some difficulty, curling up against her side like he used to do when he was younger. "It's okay to be scared, Grandma," he said softly. "You always tell me that." Eleanor felt a fresh wave of tears threaten to overwhelm her. She pulled Thomas close, marveling at the wisdom in her young grandson. "You're right, my brave boy. It is okay to be scared. But do you know what's stronger than fear?" Thomas looked up at her, his eyes bright despite the dark circles beneath them. "Love? That's right," Eleanor said, managing a watery smile. "Love, and I love you more than all the stars in the sky." They sat there on the kitchen floor, grandmother and grandson, drawing strength from each other. And in that moment, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. They would get through this, not just because of the treatments or the doctors, but because of the love that bound them together. As she helped Thomas back to bed, tucking him in with extra care, Eleanor made a silent vow. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage and grace that Thomas showed every day. For him, for Lisa, for the family they were fighting so hard to keep whole, she would be strong. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, they began to see signs of improvement. Thomas's blood work started showing promising changes. He had more energy, even on treatment days. And most encouragingly, the tumor that had brought them to this point was beginning to shrink. Dr. Reeves, usually so reserved, allowed herself a small smile as she shared the latest scan results with them. "It's still early," she cautioned, "but this is very encouraging. Thomas is responding well to the treatment." Eleanor felt a surge of hope so strong it nearly took her breath away. She looked at Thomas, saw the spark of life burning brighter in his eyes, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to truly believe that they might win this battle. As they left the doctor's office that day, Thomas tugged on Eleanor's hand. "Grandma," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "can we go to the park? Just for a little while?" Eleanor hesitated, her protective instincts warring with the desire to grant him this simple pleasure. But as she looked at his hopeful face, she made a decision. "You know what? I think that's a wonderful idea." They spent an hour at a small park near the clinic, Thomas delighting in the simple act of sitting on a swing, Eleanor gently pushing him. As the autumn sun warmed their faces, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. They still had a long way to go, but in this moment, watching Thomas laugh as he soared through the air, she knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. That night, as she tucked Thomas into bed, he asked a question that caught her off guard. "Grandma, when we go home, where will we live?" The question hit Eleanor like a physical blow. In all the chaos and worry of the past months, she hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. The reality of their situation, no house to return to, savings depleted by medical bills, suddenly loomed large. But looking at Thomas, his eyes heavy with sleep but still bright with hope, Eleanor found her answer. "Home is wherever we're together, sweetheart. We'll figure out the details when the time comes. For now, let's focus on getting you better. Okay?" Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. As he drifted off to sleep, Eleanor sat by his bedside, her mind racing. She had always been a planner, someone who liked to have everything figured out. But this journey had taught her the value of living in the moment, of finding joy and purpose in the here and now. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Eleanor knew they would face them together. And that, she realized, was the true meaning of home. As the weeks turned into months, life at the Mayo Clinic began to take on a rhythm of its own. Eleanor found herself settling into a routine that, while far from normal, provided a sense of stability in their tumultuous journey. Every morning began with Thomas's vitals check, followed by breakfast in the small apartment kitchen. Then came the treatments, grueling but necessary, punctuated by moments of unexpected joy. A joke from a kind nurse, a small victory in Thomas's recovery, or a video call from Robert back home, his familiar face a comforting link to their old life. It was during one of these video calls, nearly 3 months into their stay in Rochester, that Robert shared some news that caught Eleanor off guard. "Elle," he said, his face serious on the small screen of her tablet. "I've been thinking. That empty lot next to my house. The one that's been on the market forever? I bought it." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "You did? But why? You always said your house was more than big enough for you." Robert's eyes crinkled with a mixture of mischief and emotion. "Well, I thought maybe when you and Thomas come home, you might need a place to build a new house. If you want, that is. The lot's yours, Elle. Consider it a welcome home gift." For a moment, Eleanor was speechless. The generosity of the gesture, the hope it represented, overwhelmed her. "Robert, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied softly. "Just focus on getting that grandson of yours healthy. The rest will fall into place." After ending the call, Eleanor sat in stunned silence. The possibility of a new home, a fresh start, had seemed so distant. Now, suddenly, it felt real, tangible. She found herself imagining a new house, filled with laughter and new memories, right next door to her oldest friend. Lost in thought, she almost missed the sound of Thomas's voice calling from the other room. She hurried to his bedside, where he sat propped up against a mountain of pillows, his face flushed with excitement. "Grandma, look." He held up a sheet of paper covered in colorful drawings. "I designed our new house." Eleanor's heart swelled as she took in the crayon sketch. There was a big tree in the front yard, not unlike the maple from their old home. A winding path led to a front porch with a swing. And there, drawn with careful detail, were 3 stick figures: Thomas, Eleanor, and Lisa, all holding hands. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Tell me all about it." As Thomas launched into an elaborate explanation of his architectural vision, complete with a secret treehouse and a room just for his growing collection of science books, Eleanor marveled at his resilience. Here he was, in the midst of a grueling battle for his life, already planning for the future with unwavering optimism. The next day brought another round of tests and treatments. Dr. Reeves studied the results with her usual intensity, but this time, there was an unmistakable glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "The tumor has shrunk significantly," she announced, pointing to the scan on her computer screen. "More importantly, we're seeing a marked improvement in Thomas's overall cell function. If this trend continues..." She trailed off, and Eleanor felt her heart race. "If it continues?" she prompted. Dr. Reeves allowed herself a small smile. "If it continues, we might be looking at full remission. But," she cautioned, holding up a hand, "we're not there yet." The next few weeks will be crucial. As they left the doctor's office, Eleanor felt as though she was walking on air. She looked down at Thomas, who was practically bouncing in his wheelchair, his energy levels higher than they'd been in months. "Did you hear that, Grandma?" he exclaimed. "I'm getting better. Can we celebrate? Maybe get ice cream?" Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed through the hospital corridor. "Ice cream sounds perfect, my brave boy." That evening, as Thomas dozed off early, tired out from the excitement of the day, Eleanor and Lisa sat at the small kitchen table, cups of tea cooling between them. "Mom," Lisa said, her voice hesitant, "I've been thinking about when we go home." Eleanor nodded, encouraging her daughter to continue. I think I want to go back to school. Finish my degree. I know it might be tough, with everything that's happened, but seeing Thomas fight so hard, it's inspired me. I want to do more, be more." Pride swelled in Eleanor's chest. "Oh, sweetheart. I think that's a wonderful idea. We'll make it work, somehow." As they discussed the logistics, childcare, finances, schedules, Eleanor felt a sense of normalcy that had been absent for so long. They were planning for the future, a future that now seemed brighter than ever. The following weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. Thomas's condition continued to improve, but there were still setbacks, days of intense nausea, moments of crushing fatigue. Through it all, Eleanor remained a steady presence, her love and determination unwavering. It was a crisp November morning when Dr. Reeves called them into her office, her face unreadable. Eleanor felt her heart pounding as they waited for the doctor to speak, her hand clasped tightly in Thomas's. Dr. Reeves took a deep breath, then broke into a wide smile, the first Eleanor had ever seen on the usually serious doctor's face. "I'm pleased to tell you that Thomas is officially in remission." The words hung in the air for a moment, almost too good to be true. Then Thomas let out a whoop of joy, and Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. Lisa sobbed openly, pulling Thomas into a tight hug. "Now, drive." Reeves continued, her tone becoming serious again. "This doesn't mean the journey is over. We'll need to monitor Thomas closely, and there will be follow-up treatments." But her smile returned, softer this time. "You've won the hardest part of the battle." As they left the hospital that day, Eleanor felt as though she was seeing the world through new eyes. The autumn colors seemed brighter, the air crisper, full of possibility. Thomas insisted on walking rather than using his wheelchair, his steps slow but steady. "Grandma," he said, looking up at her with shining eyes, "can we go home now?" Eleanor's heart clenched at the innocent question. Home. Such a simple word, yet so complex now. "Soon, sweetheart," she promised. Very soon. That night, as Thomas slept peacefully for the first time in months without the hum of machines or the beep of monitors, Eleanor sat by the window of their small apartment. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the fear, the pain, the sacrifices. But also the love, the strength, the unbreakable bonds that had been forged in the fire of adversity. She thought about Robert's generous offer, the empty lot waiting for them back in Lakeside. A blank canvas on which to build a new life. She thought about Lisa's determination to finish her degree, to create a better future for herself and Thomas. And she thought about Thomas, her brave, resilient, incredible grandson. How close they had come to losing him, and how fiercely he had fought to stay. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Eleanor made a decision. They would go home, yes. But home would no longer be defined by walls and a roof. Home would be wherever they were together, supporting each other, loving each other. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, financial struggles, the ongoing medical care Thomas would need, the adjustment to their new reality. But Eleanor knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that they would face it all together. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the unfamiliar city that had become their temporary haven, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. They had been through the darkest of storms and emerged on the other side, battered but unbroken. Whatever the future held, they would meet it with open hearts and unshakable hope. Eleanor smiled, watching the new day dawn. It was time to go home, not to a place, but to each other. And in that, she knew, they had already found the greatest treasure of all. The journey home was a whirlwind of emotions and activity. There were final checkups, discharge papers to sign, and heartfelt goodbyes to the medical staff who had become like family over the past months. Dr. Reeves, her usual stoic demeanor softening, pulled Eleanor aside just before they left. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice low and earnest, "I've seen a lot of families go through this journey, but few with the grace and strength you've shown. Thomas is lucky to have you." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "We're the lucky ones, Doctor. Thank you for giving us our future back." As their plane touched down in their home state, Eleanor felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. So much had changed in their absence. Would Lakeside still feel like home? Robert was waiting for them at the airport, his familiar face a welcome sight. As he pulled up in his old pickup truck, Eleanor was struck by how normal it all felt, as if the past few months had been nothing but a dream. "Welcome home, travelers," Robert said, his eyes twinkling as he helped load their luggage. "The town hasn't been the same without you." The drive back to Lakeside was filled with Thomas's excited chatter as he pointed out familiar landmarks. Eleanor found herself drinking in the sights, the rolling hills, the old oak tree at Miller's Bend, the glint of the lake in the distance. It all looked exactly the same, yet somehow different, as if she was seeing it through new eyes. As they turned onto their old street, Eleanor felt her heart rate quicken. She wasn't prepared for the surge of emotion that hit her as they passed her old house. The new owners had painted it a cheerful yellow, and children's toys dotted the front lawn. It was no longer her home, but seeing it full of life brought a bittersweet smile to her face. Robert pulled up in front of his house, and Eleanor gasped. There, on the empty lot next door, stood a simple yet beautiful structure, the frame of a new house, its skeleton reaching toward the sky. "Robert," she breathed, "what is this?" He grinned, a bit sheepishly. "Well, I might have called in a few favors. The whole town pitched in, We wanted you to have something to come home to." Overwhelmed, Eleanor stepped out of the truck, Thomas and Lisa close behind. As they approached the construction site, she saw a large banner strung between two support beams. "Welcome home, Thompson family." And there, gathered around the unfinished house, were familiar faces, neighbors, friends, even some of Thomas's old classmates. They erupted in cheers as the family drew near. Thomas tugged on Eleanor's hand, his eyes wide with wonder. "Grandma, look, it's just like my drawing." And indeed, Eleanor could see the similarities to Thomas's crayon sketch: the wide front porch, the space for a swing, even the outline of what would become a treehouse in the old oak tree at the edge of the property. As they were enveloped in hugs and well wishes, Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was more than just a house. It was a testament to the power of community, of love, of the human spirit's capacity for kindness. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. The house slowly took shape, with volunteers coming by daily to help with the construction. Eleanor, Lisa, and Thomas pitched in where they could, painting walls and planting a small garden. One evening, as the sun was setting, Eleanor found Thomas sitting on a stack of lumber, staring thoughtfully at the half-finished house. "Penny for your thoughts, sweetheart?" she asked, settling down beside him. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Grandma," he said finally, "I've been thinking about everything that happened." Eleanor felt her heart clench. They hadn't talked much about the ordeal since coming home, focusing instead on moving forward. "What about it?" "Well," Thomas said slowly, "it was really scary. And it hurt a lot. But I think it also made us stronger. Don't you?" Eleanor wrapped an arm around her grandson, marveling at his insight. "I think you're right, my brave boy. It did make us stronger. And it taught us what's really important in life." Thomas nodded sagely. "Family, and love, and having a good doctor." Eleanor couldn't help but laugh, pulling Thomas close. "That's exactly right." As the weeks turned into months, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The house was completed just before Christmas, and moving in felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. It wasn't the home Eleanor had lived in for decades, filled with old memories, but it was a home built on love, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. Lisa threw herself into her studies, juggling online classes with caring for Thomas. Eleanor watched with pride as her daughter blossomed, finding a new sense of purpose and direction. Thomas, though still needing regular checkups and follow-up treatments, regained his strength day by day. He returned to school part-time, his classmates welcoming him back with open arms. Eleanor's heart swelled every time she saw him laughing with friends or engrossed in a new science book, marveling at the resilience of youth. One crisp spring morning, almost a year to the day since Thomas's diagnosis, Eleanor stood on the front porch of their new home, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She watched as Thomas and Lisa planted flowers in the garden, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Robert ambled over from his house, leaning on the porch railing beside her. "Penny for your thoughts, Elle?" Eleanor smiled at the familiar phrase. "Just thinking about how much can change in a year. How life can take you down paths you never expected." Robert nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. "Regrets?" Eleanor considered the question, watching as Thomas showed Lisa a worm he'd found, both of them giggling. She thought about the old house, about the life they'd left behind. She thought about the grueling months of treatment, the fear, the uncertainty. "No," she said finally, her voice firm. "No regrets. We lost a house, but we gained so much more. We learned what true strength is, what family really means. And we learned that home isn't a place, it's the people you love." Robert smiled, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "You always were the wisest of us all, Elle." As they stood there, watching the simple scene of family and new beginnings, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with sacrifices and hard choices. But standing here, in this moment, she knew with absolute certainty that every step had been worth it. The house behind her was new, its walls not yet filled with memories. But it was home. A home built on love, on resilience, on the unbreakable bonds of family. And as Eleanor looked out at the life blooming before her, she knew that the best was yet to come. Thomas looked up from the garden, catching her eye. He waved, his smile bright enough to rival the spring sunshine. "Grandma, come see what we planted." Eleanor set down her coffee cup, ready to join her family in the simple joy of nurturing new life. As she stepped off the porch, she sent a silent prayer of gratitude to the universe. for second chances, for the strength to persevere, and for the love that had carried them through their darkest hours. The journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, new mountains to climb. But Eleanor knew, with the certainty that comes from weathering the fiercest of storms, that they would face whatever came next together. And in that togetherness, they had already found the greatest victory of all. As spring blossomed into summer, life in the Thompson household settled into a new normal. The rhythms of daily life, once taken for granted, now held a special significance. Every shared meal, every burst of laughter, every quiet moment of companionship was cherished as the gift it truly was. Eleanor found herself embracing this new chapter with open arms. The loss of her old home, once a source of heartache, had transformed into an opportunity for growth and renewal. She poured her energy into making their new house a home, filling it with warmth and creating new traditions. One sunny Saturday morning, Eleanor was tending to her small herb garden when she heard the excited patter of Thomas's footsteps approaching. "Grandma, Grandma," he called, waving a piece of paper. "Look what I got in the mail." Eleanor straightened up, brushing soil from her hands as she turned to her grandson. "What is it, sweetheart?" Thomas thrust the paper towards her, his eyes shining with excitement. "It's an invitation. Remember Drive Chen from back home? She's organizing a fundraiser for kids with rare diseases, and she wants me to speak at it." Eleanor's heart swelled with pride as she read the invitation. Dr. Chen, true to her word, had remained in touch with the family, keeping tabs on Thomas's progress. Now, she was reaching out, offering Thomas a platform to share his story and inspire others. "Oh, Thomas," Eleanor said, pulling him into a hug. "This is wonderful. How do you feel about it?" Thomas's expression turned thoughtful. "I'm a little nervous," he admitted. "But I think it's important. Maybe by telling my story, I can help other kids who are going through what I did." Eleanor marveled at her grandson's maturity and compassion. The ordeal they had been through had changed him, yes, but in many ways, it had simply brought his inherent strength and kindness to the forefront. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said. "And you know what? I have a feeling you're going to do great." The weeks leading up to the fundraiser were filled with preparation. Thomas worked diligently on his speech, with Eleanor and Lisa offering guidance and support. It was a family effort, each of them contributing ideas and encouragement. The night before the event, Eleanor found Thomas sitting on the porch swing, his speech clutched in his hands, a look of uncertainty on his face. "Nervous?" she asked, settling beside him. Thomas nodded. "What if I mess up? What if I can't help anyone?" Eleanor wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "Thomas, listen to me. Your story is powerful not because it's perfect, but because it's real. You've been through something incredible, and by sharing it, you're showing others that they're not alone. That's a gift, sweetheart. And it's one only you can give." Thomas leaned into her, drawing strength from her words and presence. "Thanks, Grandma," he said softly. "I'm really glad you'll be there with me tomorrow." The next day, as they entered the grand ballroom where the fundraiser was being held, Eleanor felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The room was filled with doctors, researchers, families, and supporters, all gathered for a common cause. Dr. Chen greeted them warmly, her face lighting up at the sight of Thomas. "Look at you," she exclaimed. "You're looking wonderful, Thomas. How are you feeling?" "A little nervous," Thomas admitted. "But ready." As Thomas took the stage, Eleanor held her breath. She watched as he adjusted the microphone, his small figure dwarfed by the podium. But when he began to speak, his voice clear and strong, she felt tears of pride spring to her eyes. "A year ago," Thomas began, "I was really sick. I was scared, and so was my family. But we learned something important. We learned that love is stronger than fear, that hope can light up even the darkest times, and that sometimes the biggest heroes are the ones who simply refuse to give up." As Thomas continued his speech, sharing his journey with honesty and courage, Eleanor glanced around the room. She saw tears in the eyes of many listeners, nods of understanding from families who had walked similar paths, and looks of renewed determination on the faces of doctors and researchers. When Thomas finished, the room erupted in applause. As he made his way back to Eleanor and Lisa, people stopped him to shake his hand, to share a word of encouragement, to thank him for his bravery. Later that evening, as they drove home, Thomas was uncharacteristically quiet. Eleanor glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there, sweetheart?" Thomas nodded slowly. I think I know what I want to do when I grow up, he said. Oh? Eleanor encouraged. What's that? I want to be a doctor, Thomas said, his voice filled with conviction. Like Dr. Chen and Dr. Reeves. I want to help kids who are sick, to give them hope like they gave me. Eleanor felt her heart swell with emotion. That's a wonderful goal, Thomas. And I have no doubt that you'll be an amazing doctor someday. As they pulled into their driveway, Eleanor caught sight of Robert waiting on their porch, a newspaper in his hand. His face broke into a wide grin as they got out of the car. There's my favorite public speaker, he called out to Thomas. You made the front page, kiddo. Sure enough, there on the front page of the local paper was a photo of Thomas at the podium, his face alight with passion as he shared his story. The headline read, Local Boy's Journey Inspires Hope and Action. As they gathered on the porch, Robert reading the article aloud, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This journey, with all its hardships and sacrifices, had led them here, to a moment of triumph, yes, but more importantly, to a deeper understanding of what truly mattered in life. The months that followed brought new challenges and joys. Lisa graduated with honors, securing a job at a local nonprofit that worked with families facing medical crises. Thomas threw himself into his studies with renewed vigor, his dream of becoming a doctor fueling his passion for learning. Eleanor found herself busier than ever, dividing her time between volunteering at the hospital where Thomas had first been treated and mentoring other families going through similar ordeals. Her experience, once a source of pain, had become a wellspring of wisdom and comfort for others. One crisp autumn evening, almost 2 years to the day since she had made the decision to sell her old house, Eleanor sat on the porch swing, a cup of tea warming her hands. She watched as Thomas and Lisa raked leaves in the yard, their laughter carried on the breeze. Robert ambled over, settling beside her on the swing. Penny for your thoughts, Elle? Eleanor smiled, the phrase now a comforting ritual between them. Just thinking about how far we've come, she said softly. 2 years ago, I thought I was losing everything. My home, my grandson, my sense of security. But now, she trailed off, gesturing to the scene before them. Thomas was attempting to jump into a pile of leaves, with Lisa playfully trying to stop him. Their joy was palpable, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Now, Eleanor continued, I realized that what I thought was an ending was really a beginning. We lost a house, yes, but we gained so much more. We found strength we didn't know we had, discovered the true meaning of community, and learned that home isn't a place. It's the people you love. Robert nodded, his eyes misty. You know, Elle, when you first told me about selling your house for Thomas's treatment, I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Now, seeing all this, he gestured to the house, the yard, the family before them. I know I was right. Eleanor reached out, squeezing Robert's hand in gratitude. We couldn't have done it without you, old friend. Without all of you. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Eleanor felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with moments of despair and triumph in equal measure. But standing here, watching her family, whole, healthy, and happy, she knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. The house behind her was no longer new, its walls now filled with fresh memories and new traditions. It was home in every sense of the word, a testament to love, to resilience, to the power of hope in the face of adversity. Thomas looked up from his leaf pile, catching Eleanor's eye. He waved, his smile bright and carefree. Grandma, come join us. Eleanor set down her tea, ready to join her family in their simple joy. As she stepped off the porch, she sent a silent prayer of gratitude to the universe, for second chances, for the strength to persevere, and for the love that had carried them through their darkest hours. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges ahead, new mountains to climb. But Eleanor knew, with the certainty that comes from weathering the fiercest of storms, that they would face whatever came next together. And in that togetherness, they had already found the greatest victory of all. As she reached Thomas and Lisa, allowing herself to be pulled into their leaf-throwing antics, Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure, unbridled joy. This, she thought, was the true meaning of home. Not a structure of wood and brick, but a tapestry woven of love, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of family. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and love, Eleanor knew that they had not just survived, they had triumphed. As the seasons continued to change, bringing with them new challenges and opportunities, the Thompson family found themselves settling into a rhythm that balanced their newfound appreciation for life with the practicalities of moving forward. The house that had once been just a frame of possibilities was now a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the occasional chaos that comes with a growing family. One crisp autumn morning, as Eleanor was preparing breakfast, she heard an excited commotion from Thomas's room. Moments later, her grandson burst into the kitchen, waving a letter in his hand, his eyes shining with excitement. "Grandma, Mom, look," he exclaimed, thrusting the letter towards them. "I got accepted into the Junior Scientists program at the university." Eleanor's heart swelled with pride as she read the letter. The program was highly competitive, offering gifted students the chance to work alongside researchers during the summer. It was a significant step towards Thomas's dream of becoming a doctor. "Oh, sweetheart, this is wonderful news." Eleanor pulled Thomas into a tight hug, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her chest, a rhythm she never took for granted. Lisa, who had been pouring coffee, set down her mug and joined the embrace. "I'm so proud of you, Thomas," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your dad would have been over the moon." At the mention of Thomas's father, who had passed away when Thomas was just a toddler, a moment of somber reflection passed through the kitchen. But it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and joy. "We have to celebrate," Eleanor declared, already mentally planning a special dinner. "How about we invite Drive, Chen and Robert over this weekend?" As they sat down to breakfast, discussing plans for the celebration, Eleanor found herself marveling at how far they'd come. The dark days of Thomas's illness seemed like a distant memory, though she knew they would never truly forget. Instead, those experiences had become the foundation upon which they'd built this new life, stronger, more appreciative, and infinitely more connected. The celebration dinner that weekend was a joyous affair. Dr. Chen, who had become more than just Thomas's former doctor but a true friend to the family, arrived with a gift. A state-of-the-art microscope that had Thomas bouncing with excitement. "This was my first microscope when I started medical school, Drive," Chen explained, her eyes twinkling. "I thought it was fitting to pass it on to a future colleague." As they gathered around the dinner table, Eleanor looked at the faces of those she held dear. Lisa, confident and thriving in her new career. Thomas, healthy and bursting with potential. Robert, whose unwavering support had been a cornerstone of their recovery. And Dr. Chen, whose skill and compassion had given them the chance for this future. Robert raised his glass in a toast. "To Thomas," he said, "and to the power of love, science, and second chances." As they clinked glasses, Eleanor felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This moment, this gathering of loved ones, was the true treasure she had gained from their ordeal. The old house, with all its memories, had been a significant loss, but what they had built in its place was far more valuable. The summer of Thomas's Junior Scientists program flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor would never forget the sight of her grandson in his lab coat, bent over a microscope with an expression of intense concentration. She volunteered at the university's Family Day, proudly watching as Thomas explained his project to visitors with the confidence and enthusiasm of a seasoned researcher. It was during one of these presentations that Eleanor overheard a conversation that touched her deeply. A mother, whose child was undergoing treatment for a similar condition to what Thomas had faced, approached him after his talk. "Your story gives me hope," the woman said, her eyes brimming with tears. "Seeing you here, healthy and pursuing your dreams. It helps me believe that my son can have that future too." Thomas, with a maturity beyond his years, took the woman's hand. "Your son is stronger than you know," he said softly. "And so are you. Never give up hope." As Eleanor watched this interaction, she felt a profound sense of purpose. Their journey, difficult as it had been, was now a beacon of hope for others. The sacrifice of her old home had set in motion a chain of events that was touching lives far beyond their own family. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new milestones and challenges. Lisa advanced in her career, eventually becoming the director of the nonprofit where she had started. Thomas excelled in his studies, his passion for medicine growing with each passing year. Eleanor, for her part, found a new calling. Inspired by their experiences, she started a support group for grandparents caring for sick grandchildren. The group met in the community center, sharing stories, offering advice, and providing a shoulder to lean on during difficult times. It was during one of these meetings, as Eleanor listened to a grandmother sharing her fears about her granddaughter's upcoming surgery, that she had an epiphany. The woman's story was achingly familiar: the fear, the uncertainty, the overwhelming love that drove her to do whatever it took to help her grandchild. "You know," Eleanor said gently, when the woman had finished speaking, "I used to think that selling my house was the biggest sacrifice I could make. But I've come to realize that it wasn't a sacrifice at all. It was an investment, in love, in family, in hope." The room fell silent as Eleanor continued, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "Our homes are more than just bricks and mortar. They're the vessels that hold our memories, our dreams. But when we're faced with the choice between holding onto those physical structures and fighting for the lives of those we love, it's not really a choice at all." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each person there. "What we gain, the strength, the perspective, the depth of love, it's worth more than any house could ever be. We become the homes our grandchildren need, safe harbors in the storm, foundations of love and support." As Eleanor finished speaking, she saw tears in the eyes of many in the room, but also nods of understanding and glimmers of hope. She realized that in sharing her story, in turning her pain into purpose, she had found a way to honor the journey they had been through. That evening, as Eleanor sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues, she heard the familiar creak of the screen door. Thomas stepped out, now a tall teenager on the cusp of adulthood, and settled beside her. "Penny for your thoughts, Grandma?" he asked, echoing the phrase she and Robert had exchanged so many times. Eleanor smiled, wrapping an arm around her grandson. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," she said softly. "How lucky we all are." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know," he said finally, "I've been thinking a lot about what you did for me. Selling your house, uprooting your whole life. I don't know if I ever really thanked you for that." Eleanor felt her heart swell with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick. "You don't need to thank me. Seeing you healthy, happy, pursuing your dreams, that's all the thanks I need." Thomas turned to her, his eyes serious. "But I want you to know that I understand now. The sacrifice, the courage it took. And I promise you, Grandma, I'm going to make it count. Every day, with every patient I help in the future, it'll be because of what you did." As they sat there, grandmother and grandson, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been long and often difficult, filled with moments of fear and uncertainty. But it had also been a journey of love, of resilience, of discovering strengths they never knew they possessed. The house behind them, once new and unfamiliar, was now a true home, filled with laughter, with memories, with the warmth of family. It wasn't the house Eleanor had lived in for decades, the one filled with old memories and the echoes of a different life. But it was, in many ways, so much more. As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Eleanor realized that this moment, this life they had built together, was the real triumph. They had not just survived, they had flourished. And in doing so, they had created something beautiful and enduring, a legacy of love, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "Love you, Grandma," he said softly. "To the moon and back." Eleanor smiled, her heart full to bursting. "And I love you, my brave boy," she replied. "To the stars and beyond." As they sat there, enveloped in the quiet of the evening and the warmth of their love, Eleanor knew that no matter what challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. For they had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that home is not a place, but a feeling. A feeling of love, of belonging, of being exactly where you're meant to be. And in that knowledge, they had found the greatest wealth of all. As the years continued to unfold, the Thompson family's story became woven into the fabric of their community. Their journey of resilience and hope inspired others, creating ripples of positivity that extended far beyond their immediate circle. Thomas's 18th birthday arrived, marking a significant milestone. The house buzzed with excitement as Eleanor and Lisa prepared for the celebration. As Eleanor hung streamers in the living room, she caught sight of a framed photo on the mantel, a picture of Thomas in his hospital bed, taken during those dark days of treatment. Beside it stood a more recent photo of Thomas in his lab coat, beaming with pride after winning a science fair. The juxtaposition of these images struck Eleanor deeply. They were a testament to how far they had come, a visual representation of their journey from despair to triumph. The party was a joyous affair, filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of friends and family. Dr. Chen attended, as did many of Thomas's classmates and teachers. Robert, ever the loyal friend, manned the grill, filling the air with the tempting aroma of barbecue. As the evening wore on, Thomas clinked his glass, calling for everyone's attention. The chatter died down, and all eyes turned to the young man standing in the center of the room. "I want to thank you all for being here today," Thomas began, his voice steady and clear. "But more than that, I want to thank you for being there during the toughest times of my life." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing on Eleanor. "Especially you, Grandma. You gave up everything for me, and I will never forget that. Your sacrifice is the reason I'm standing here today." Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes as Thomas continued. "As most of you know, I've been accepted to pre-med at State University," he said, prompting a round of applause. "But what you don't know is that I've also been awarded a full scholarship." A gasp of surprise and joy rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her heart swelling with pride. "The scholarship," Thomas went on, "is for students who have overcome significant medical challenges and wish to pursue a career in medicine. But here's the thing. I'm not just going to med school for me. I'm going for every kid who's lying in a hospital bed right now, scared and unsure of their future. I'm going for every family who's facing impossible choices, like selling their home to pay for treatment." He paused, his eyes shining with determination. "I'm going to become a doctor, and I promise you, I will do everything in my power to ensure that no family has to make the kind of sacrifice my grandma made for me." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Eleanor found herself enveloped in a tight hug by Lisa, both of them crying tears of joy and pride. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Chen approached Eleanor, a warm smile on her face. "You know," she said softly, "in all my years of practice, I've seen many families face unimaginable challenges. But few have done it with the grace and strength that you have shown, Eleanor. You should be very proud, not just of Thomas, but of yourself." Eleanor squeezed the doctor's hand gratefully. "We couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You gave us hope when we needed it most." As the last of the guests departed, Eleanor found herself alone on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. The cool night air carried the scent of late summer flowers, and in the distance, she could hear the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. Robert joined her, leaning against the porch railing. "Quite a night, EH.L.?" Eleanor nodded, a contented smile playing on her lips. "I never could have imagined this, Robert. All those years ago, when I was signing away my old house, I thought I was losing everything. But look at what we gained." Robert chuckled softly. "You always did have a knack for turning lemons into lemonade, L. But this?" He gestured towards the house, where Thomas and Lisa could be heard laughing as they cleaned up. "This is something special." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Robert spoke again, his voice gentle. "You know, Elle, I've been thinking. That scholarship Thomas got? It's a wonderful thing, but I can't help feeling like there should be something for the families too. The ones who make sacrifices like you did." Eleanor turned to him, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Robert's eyes twinkled with excitement. "Well, what if we started a foundation? Something to help families who are facing medical crises, maybe help with housing costs, or provide temporary homes while kids are getting treatment. We could call it the Thompson Home and Hope Foundation." Eleanor felt her breath catch in her throat. The idea was beautiful, a way to turn their personal journey into something that could help countless others. "Robert," she said softly, that's an incredible idea. But it would take so much work, so much money." Robert grinned, the same mischievous grin he'd had since they were kids. "Well, as it happens, I've been doing pretty well with my investments. And I can't think of a better way to use that money. What do you say, Elle? Ready for a new adventure?" In that moment, Eleanor felt a surge of energy and purpose that she hadn't experienced in years. The idea of being able to help other families, to ease their burdens during the most challenging times of their lives, it felt right. It felt like the next chapter of their story. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Yes, let's do it." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. As Thomas prepared for college, Eleanor and Robert threw themselves into establishing the Thompson Home and Hope Foundation. They worked tirelessly, reaching out to local businesses for support, organizing fundraisers, and navigating the complex world of nonprofit regulations. Lisa's experience in the nonprofit sector proved invaluable, and she eagerly joined the effort, taking on a leadership role in the foundation alongside her regular job. Dr. Chen became a key advisor, helping to identify families in need and providing medical expertise. The day the foundation officially launched was one Eleanor would never forget. Standing on a small stage in the community center, surrounded by friends, family, and supporters, she felt a profound sense of coming full circle. Years ago, she began, addressing the crowd, "I sold my home to save my grandson's life. It was the easiest difficult decision I've ever made. But I know that not every family has that option. That's why we're here today, to ensure that no family has to choose between a roof over their head and life-saving treatment for their child." As she spoke about the foundation's mission, Eleanor saw heads nodding in understanding, saw tears in the eyes of those who had faced similar struggles. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that they were doing the right thing. In the months and years that followed, the Thompson Home and Hope Foundation grew beyond Eleanor's wildest dreams. They partnered with hospitals across the state, providing housing assistance, temporary homes, and support services to families facing medical crises. The community rallied around the cause, with volunteers and donations pouring in. Thomas, true to his word, excelled in his pre-med studies. During his breaks, he would come home and volunteer with the foundation, sharing his story with families and offering hope to children facing similar battles to the one he had fought. One crisp autumn day, as Eleanor sat in the foundation's small office reviewing applications for assistance, she received a call that brought her journey full circle. "Mrs. Thompson?" A tentative voice came through the phone. "My name is Emily. I heard about your foundation from our doctor. My daughter, she's sick, and we're struggling to keep up with the bills. We might lose our house." As Eleanor listened to Emily's story, she felt a wave of empathy wash over her. She remembered all too well the fear and uncertainty this mother was feeling. "Emily," Eleanor said gently when the woman had finished speaking, "I want you to take a deep breath. You're not alone in this. We're here to help." As she explained the assistance the foundation could offer, Eleanor heard a sob of relief from the other end of the line. "Thank you," Emily whispered. "You have no idea what this means to us." After ending the call, Eleanor sat back in her chair, a sense of profound gratitude washing over her. The journey that had begun with the heart-wrenching decision to sell her home had led her here, to a place where she could offer hope and help to others facing similar challenges. She glanced at the photos on her desk. Thomas in his college dorm, Lisa at the helm of her nonprofit, Robert grinning beside the foundation's first temporary home for families. And there, in the center, a picture of their old house, a reminder of where it all began. Eleanor smiled, running her fingers over the frame. That house had been more than just a structure of wood and brick. It had been a vessel for memories, for love, for the foundation of their family. And in selling it, she hadn't lost those things. She had set them free, allowing them to grow and touch countless other lives. As she turned back to her work, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but she was ready to face them. For she had learned that the truest home isn't found in a physical place, but in the love we share, the hope we nurture, and the difference we make in the lives of others. And in that knowledge, Eleanor Thompson had found her greatest triumph of all. As the years continued to unfold, the Thompson Home and Hope Foundation became a beacon of light for families facing medical crises across the state. Eleanor, now in her early 80s, remained actively involved, her passion for helping others burning as brightly as ever. One particularly memorable day, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor at the foundation's office. A young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, stood hesitantly in the doorway, her eyes wide with a mix of nervousness and determination. "Mrs. Thompson?" the young woman asked. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm Jessica. You helped my family when I was sick, about 15 years ago." Eleanor's mind raced, trying to place the face. Then, suddenly, it clicked. "Jessica Miller? Little Jessie with the pigtails?" The young woman's face broke into a wide smile. "Yes, that's me. I can't believe you remember. Of course I remember, Eleanor said warmly, gesturing for Jessica to take a seat. You were one of our first families. How are you doing, dear? As Jessica settled into the chair, her story poured out. She had indeed recovered from her childhood illness, going on to finish school and even college. Now, she was starting her career as a social worker, inspired by the help her family had received in their time of need. I wanted to come and thank you in person, Jessica said, her eyes shining with gratitude. What you did for us, it changed everything. And I was hoping, well, I was wondering if there might be a place for me here at the foundation? Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was why they had started the foundation, not just to provide immediate help, but to create a ripple effect of hope and positive change. Jessica, Eleanor said, reaching out to squeeze the young woman's hand, I think we would be honored to have you join us. As Jessica left the office that day, with plans to start as a volunteer the following week, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. The foundation wasn't just changing lives in the moment, it was shaping futures, creating a legacy of compassion and community support. That evening, as Eleanor recounted the day's events to Robert over their usual cup of tea on the porch, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. You know, Robert, she mused, when I sold my house all those years ago, I thought I was losing a part of myself. But now I see that I was actually finding a bigger purpose. Robert nodded, his eyes twinkling with understanding. You always did have a knack for turning setbacks into stepping stones, Elle. But I don't think even you could have imagined how far this would go. Indeed, the foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams. They now operated several temporary homes near major hospitals, provided financial assistance to hundreds of families each year, and had even started a scholarship program for survivors of childhood illnesses who wanted to pursue careers in healthcare or social services. Thomas, now in his final year of medical school, had become a vocal advocate for the foundation, using his own story to inspire donations and support. Lisa had taken on a leadership role, skillfully balancing her work at the foundation with her own career and family life. As Eleanor and Robert sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the lake, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Big news, Grandma. Got my residency match, pediatric oncology at Mayo Clinic. Couldn't have done it without you. Love you to the moon and back. Eleanor felt tears of joy prick her eyes as she showed the message to Robert. Her grandson, once so close to being lost, was now on the cusp of becoming the very kind of doctor who had saved his life. You know, Robert said softly, I think it's time we start thinking about the future of the foundation. We're not getting any younger, Elle. Eleanor nodded, understanding the unspoken question. You're right, but I think we've built something here that can outlast us. With Lisa, Thomas, and now young Jessica, I believe the foundation is in good hands. The next few months saw a flurry of activity as Eleanor and Robert began the process of transitioning leadership of the foundation to the younger generation. They organized board meetings, updated bylaws, and spent countless hours mentoring their successors. During this time, Eleanor also focused on documenting the foundation's history, wanting to ensure that the stories of the families they had helped would never be forgotten. She spent hours interviewing past recipients of their aid, collecting photos, and writing down her own memories. One afternoon, as she was sorting through old photographs for the foundation's archive, Eleanor came across a picture she had almost forgotten about. It was a snapshot of her old house, taken on the day she had signed it away. In the photo, she stood on the front porch, her face a mix of determination and sadness. As she studied the image, Eleanor was struck by how much had changed since that day. The house in the photo was just a building, but it had been the catalyst for something far greater. In letting it go, she had opened the door to a future filled with purpose and impact. Inspired by the photo, Eleanor decided to organize a special event for the foundation's upcoming anniversary. She reached out to as many of the families they had helped over the years as she could find, inviting them to a grand reunion and celebration. The day of the event arrived, and Eleanor found herself overwhelmed by the turnout. The community center was packed with familiar faces, children who had grown into healthy adults, parents who had weathered impossible storms, volunteers who had given countless hours. As Eleanor took the stage to address the crowd, she felt a sense of awe at the sea of faces before her. Each person represented a life touched, a family supported, a glimmer of hope provided in dark times. When I sold my home to save my grandson's life, Eleanor began, her voice strong despite her age. "I thought I was losing everything. But standing here today, looking at all of you, I realize that I gained so much more than I ever could have imagined." She went on to share stories of triumph and resilience, of families who had faced the unimaginable and come out stronger. As she spoke, she saw heads nodding in recognition, saw tears being wiped away, saw hands reaching out to comfort and support. This foundation, Eleanor continued, was born out of love and necessity. But it has grown into something far greater than we ever dreamed. It has become a testament to the power of community, to the strength we find when we support one another. As she concluded her speech, inviting Thomas and Lisa to join her on stage as the future leaders of the foundation, the room erupted in applause. Eleanor felt a profound sense of completion, of a journey coming full circle. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Eleanor found a quiet moment alone. She stood by the window, looking out at the town she had called home for so many years. In the distance, she could just make out the roof of her old house, now home to another family, creating their own memories within its walls. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Robert, his familiar comforting smile warming her heart. "Penny for your thoughts, Elle?" he asked, echoing the phrase they had exchanged countless times over the years. Eleanor smiled, linking her arm through his. "I was just thinking about home, Robert. About how its meaning has changed for me over the years." Robert nodded, understanding as always. "And what does home mean to you now, Elle?" Eleanor paused, considering the question. She thought of the foundation, of the families they had helped, of Thomas and Lisa carrying on their legacy. She thought of the community that had rallied around them, of the lives changed and the hope spread. "Home," she said finally, her voice soft but sure, "is wherever love grows and hope flourishes. It's not confined by walls or defined by an address. It's in the hearts of every person we've helped, every life we've touched." As they stood there, two old friends who had weathered so much together, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The journey that had begun with the heart-wrenching decision to sell her house had led her here, to a place of purpose, of impact, of deep and abiding love. She had lost a house, yes. But in return, she had gained a world of homes. Homes built not of brick and mortar, but of compassion, resilience, and unwavering hope. And in that, Eleanor Thompson had found her truest and most lasting legacy. As the golden hues of autumn painted the landscape around Lakeside, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. Now in her mid-80s, she moved a bit slower, but her spirit remained as vibrant as ever. The Thompson Home and Hope Foundation had become her life's work, a testament to the power of love and community in the face of adversity. On a crisp Saturday morning, Eleanor sat on her porch swing, a warm cup of tea cradled in her hands. The house around her, once new and unfamiliar, had become a true home, filled with memories of laughter, tears, and triumphant moments. As she gazed out at the neighborhood, she spotted a young family moving in across the street, their excitement palpable even from a distance. The sight brought a smile to Eleanor's face, reminding her of her own journey. She thought about the day she had signed away her old house, the fear and uncertainty that had gripped her heart. But that decision, born out of desperate love for her grandson, had set in motion a chain of events that had touched countless lives. As if summoned by her thoughts, she heard the familiar sound of Thomas's car pulling into the driveway. Her grandson, now Drive, Thomas Thompson, stepped out, his white coat exchanged for casual weekend attire. At 32, he had become everything she had hoped for and more, a skilled pediatric oncologist with a compassionate heart and an unwavering commitment to helping others. "Grandma," Thomas called out, his face lighting up as he bounded up the porch steps. "I've got some news." Eleanor set down her tea, opening her arms for a hug. "Well, don't keep an old lady in suspense," she teased. Thomas settled beside her on the swing, his excitement barely contained. "Remember that research grant I applied for? The one for developing new treatments for rare childhood cancers?" Eleanor nodded, her heart already swelling with pride. "I got it, Grandma. Full funding for 5 years. And here's the best part. I'm going to be collaborating with Dr. Chen. Can you believe it? It feels like everything's coming full circle." As Thomas shared the details of his upcoming research, Eleanor felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The boy who had once teetered on the brink of death was now at the forefront of cutting-edge medical research, poised to help children facing the same battles he had fought. "Oh, Thomas," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you. Your grandfather would have been over the moon." Thomas squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Grandma. Your sacrifice, your love, it gave me this chance. And I promise, I'm going to make the most of it." As they sat together, enjoying the quiet morning and each other's company, Eleanor's mind wandered to the Foundation's latest project. They were in the process of opening a new temporary home near the Children's Hospital, a place where families could stay together during long-term treatments. "You know," Eleanor mused, "I've been thinking about naming the new house." Thomas looked at her curiously. "Oh, what did you have in mind?" Eleanor smiled, a mixture of nostalgia and hope in her eyes. "I was thinking we could call it New Beginnings. Because that's what it represents, isn't it? A fresh start, a place of hope for families going through their darkest times." Thomas nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind the name. "I think it's perfect, Grandma. Just like what you did for me was a new beginning." Later that afternoon, as Eleanor prepared for the Foundation's monthly board meeting, she received an unexpected call. It was from Emily, the mother she had helped years ago when the Foundation was still in its infancy. "Mrs. Thompson," Emily's voice came through, filled with emotion. "I hope you remember me. I'm calling because, well, my daughter Lily just got accepted to medical school. And she wants to specialize in pediatric oncology, just like your grandson. Your Foundation's scholarship is making it possible for her to follow her dreams." As Eleanor listened to Emily's grateful words, she felt a profound sense of continuity. The ripples of that one decision, to sell her house and fight for Thomas's life, continued to spread, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. The board meeting that evening was filled with energy and purpose. Lisa, now the Foundation's executive director, led the discussion with confidence and vision. Young Jessica, who had started as a volunteer and was now a key member of the team, presented a new outreach program aimed at supporting siblings of critically ill children. As Eleanor looked around the table, she saw the future of the Foundation reflected in these passionate, committed individuals. They had taken her initial act of love and turned it into a lasting legacy of hope and support for families in need. Towards the end of the meeting, Robert cleared his throat, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "I have a little surprise," he announced. "In honor of the Foundation's upcoming 20th anniversary, I've decided to donate my lake house. I think it would make a perfect retreat for families who need a break from the stress of hospital life." The room erupted in excited chatter, with Lisa already starting to plan how they could make the most of this generous gift. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at her old friend. Robert had been there from the beginning, a steady source of support and encouragement. His donation was yet another testament to the power of community and friendship. As the meeting adjourned and people began to file out, Eleanor found herself alone with Robert. "You old softy," she teased gently. "That lake house was your pride and joy." Robert shrugged, a soft smile on his face. "What good is a house if it's not filled with love and laughter? Besides, I think George would have approved." The mention of her late husband's name brought a wave of bittersweet memories. Eleanor could almost hear George's voice, encouraging her to take that leap of faith all those years ago. "You're right," she said softly. "He would have loved all of this." As they walked out into the cool evening air, Eleanor felt a sense of completeness wash over her. The journey that had begun with a heart-wrenching decision had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. The following weekend, the entire extended Thompson family gathered for a celebratory dinner. The house was filled with the sounds of laughter, the aroma of home-cooked food, and the warmth of love. As Eleanor looked around the table, she saw the fruits of her sacrifice in every face. There was Thomas, animatedly discussing his upcoming research with Dr. Chen, who had become like family over the years. Lisa and her husband, their own children now teenagers, listening intently to Jessica's stories of her work with the Foundation. Robert, as always, was by Eleanor's side, his presence a comforting constant. As the evening wore on, Thomas clinked his glass, calling for everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of gratitude. "To Grandma Eleanor, whose courage and love started it all, who taught us that home isn't just a place, but a feeling. A feeling of belonging, of hope, of unconditional love." Glasses were raised, and Eleanor felt her heart swell with emotion. As she looked at the faces of her loved ones, she realized that she had gained so much more than she had ever lost. The house she had sold was just a structure, but what she had built in its place was a legacy of love and hope that would endure for generations. Later that night, as the house quieted and the last of the guests departed, Eleanor found herself once again on the porch swing. The night was clear, the stars twinkling brightly overhead. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fears, the triumphs, the moments of doubt and the bursts of joy. She thought about the countless families the foundation had helped, the lives touched, the hope rekindled. She thought about Thomas, now saving lives in the same halls where his own life had once hung in the balance. She thought about Lisa, carrying on the work of the foundation with passion and dedication. And as she sat there, under the vast canopy of stars, Eleanor Thompson felt a profound sense of peace. She had learned, through all the twists and turns of life, that home wasn't confined to four walls and a roof. Home was wherever love flourished, wherever hope took root, wherever the human spirit triumphed over adversity. In selling her house all those years ago, she hadn't lost a home. She had gained a world of homes, in the hearts of every family they had helped, in the lives of every child given a second chance, in the community that had rallied around their cause. As she closed her eyes, feeling the gentle night breeze on her face, Eleanor smiled. The journey wasn't over. There would always be more families to help, more hope to spread. But in this moment, she knew with absolute certainty that every sacrifice, every hardship, every moment of doubt had been worth it. For in the end, she had discovered the truest meaning of home, not in bricks and mortar, but in the enduring power of love, the strength of community, and the unbreakable bonds of family. And in that knowledge, Eleanor Thompson had found her greatest triumph of all. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings.